Hi fifth graders, welcome back to lesson 2C. This is part 2 and we are continuing to explore balanced systems in an ecosystem. Last class we worked on balancing the population of producers. We added plant A and B to our ecology lab simulator and we added the rabbit which ate plant A and we saw how that ecosystem balance worked. And today we're going to add to this environment. So throughout these lessons, we have learned that ecosystems have an extremely complex web of cause and effect. Changing just one connection or altering the population of any of the species within an ecosystem can have cascading effects on all the others within that ecosystem. So just making small tweaks and changes to an ecosystem has lasting effects because we know that all of these species are interconnected and they all work together to survive and to thrive in this ecosystem. So this is a link to a Loom recording of a book called What Are Food Chains and Webs? If you click on this link, it will take you to the recording of Mrs. Granier, and she's reading this book to you. It is a review, so if you would like to speed it up, you may.
This is the science of living things. What are food chains?
By clicking this playback speed button right here. I highly suggest watching that as a review as it'll help you with the rest of this lesson. Before we get into our data chart for today, we are going to review some of the important concepts. The first concept is succession. So succession in an ecosystem is when gradual changes in the structure and the makeup of an ecological community over time affects the rest of the makeup of the ecosystem. So when small changes are made, maybe a disturbance, maybe an ecosystem is destroyed. This can also happen in an area of new land where an ecosystem has never even existed before. And as this succession progresses, new populations of organisms replace the previous populations. So an example would be a dirt field being plowed and left over the entire summer. Over the summer, the weeds would start to grow in this field. After the weeds grow, small shrubs would begin to take root. After a few years, you might start to see trees beginning to grow, which would bring in plants and animals that bring in seeds from other plants, and this ecosystem would start to thrive. So succession is when there are changes made in an ecosystem, which then cause other changes to be made. So for another example, think about a rainforest. We know that trees in a rainforest are super tall and they make a canopy over the rainforest ground. So sometimes it can be a little bit dark with those leaves covering the ground. If one of those tall trees happens to fall over, a little bit of sunlight is able to peek through where that tree once was. That sunlight may lead to other plants growing on that floor of the rainforest, which might lead animals to come to that or insects. So that one tree falling over can lead to slight changes in the rest of the ecosystem. The other concept that we learned about last week was the competitive exclusion principle, which states that no two species can occupy the same niche at the same time in a particular locale if resources are limited. The presence of a consumer is needed to keep that plant in check and allow the other species to survive. So we saw this happen with plant A and B in the simulator. When they were competing for the same resources, plant A ended up killing off plant B. However, when we introduced the rabbit as a consumer to eat that plant A, it gave plant B a chance to regrow. So now that you have a sense for the interrelationships between these trophic levels and you see how we're going to see how big we can make our food webs and still have all of the species survive throughout the simulation. So we're going to keep in mind that idea of succession and the competitive exclusion principle and think of the many factors that go into sustaining an ecosystem. Is there any way we can get all along, that we can all get along and live side by side within this ecosystem? We all want to make sure that all of the plants, all of the herbivores, all of the omnivores, and the top predators are surviving and thriving in this ecosystem. So that's what you're going to be trying to accomplish today. You have two steps. The first step is to finish the first data chart. So what you're going to do is go to your assignment and click on the data chart, and you're also going to open up the Ecology Lab simulator. So first things first, and you will see this, the directions will be posted along with the assignment, it tells you that you're going to make a less than real life scenario. So this is not necessarily a real life scenario, but we're just going to see what happens. We're going to make a food chain that goes straight down the line of trophic levels, and we're going to start with plant A, and we'll add an herbivore A, we'll add an omnivore A, and we'll add the top predator. We're also going to let plant B survive on its own and see what happens. So you will see in your chart, you're going to have plant A, plant B, herbivore A, omnivore A, and your top predator. You're going to make a prediction whether or not these species are going to die off, which is represented with an X, whether they're going to increase or decrease. So if you think that plant A will die off, you're going to put an X. If you think that it will increase, you will put an I, and if you think it will decrease, you can put a D. You'll do the same for all of these. And you're going to run this simulator twice to see what happens. So if you go to the simulator, you'll notice that plant A and plant B are automatically on. Then you're going to turn on herbivore A, which is the rabbit, and you're going to make it eat plant A. See how it draws a connection? Then you're going to turn on omnivore A, which is a squirrel, and it's going to eat herbivore A. Okay? Then you're going to turn on the top predator and make it eat omnivore A. So you see we have a food chain right here. Then you're going to run the simulator, and you will see on this graph below how the population will change. Remember, you can hover your mouse over the line that is drawn, and it will tell you what the starting population is and what the ending population is. You may also be able to tell just by looking at the line. If it starts out here and the population drops all the way down to here, that means that there's a population decrease. Okay? So after you run that simulator once, record your results of what ends up happening. Then you're going to record it twice the second time and see what happens again and answer these questions. Was your prediction correct? How did you arrive at your prediction? So what made you think that plant A would die off? Or what made you think that herbivore A would increase? What differences were there between your prediction and the simulation? So what actually happened? Was your prediction correct? Were there differences? Let us know. What would happen to this imaginary ecosystem if the producers were to die out? So if plant A and plant B were to die off completely, what would happen to the rest of the ecosystem? Then you're going to go to step 2 after you've accomplished that. Step 2 says, now we're going to try more of a real life scenario and experiment with what might happen in an ecosystem that is more like a web. This time click the All On button. This model shows who eats whom and the paths by which energy is transferred. You're going to predict which populations will die out, increase in numbers, or decrease in numbers, and record your predictions. Run the simulation and record the results in your data table. Then try to modify who eats whom in order to ensure the survival of all species and record what was changed in your chart. So let's go back. We have all of the species listed in your chart. You're going to make a prediction. Once you go to the simulator, you're going to reset it by pressing this presets button. It resets it, and you're going to press All On. As you can see, suddenly our ecosystem has all of the plants and all of the animals in it. And over here, it shows you which animals eat which plants, which animals eat which plants, which animals eat which animals, and so on. So it's like a big food web. And you can see where the energy is going. So right here, the energy goes from the rabbit into the top predator, which looks like it's a wolf, okay? You're going to make a prediction in your chart. What is going to happen to each of these species in this food web? Is it going to die off? Is it going to increase? Or is it going to decrease? Then you're going to run the simulator. You will see that you will have all of these lines showing up. If you do not have a line showing up, so for instance, let's say omnivore A doesn't show up, what do you think that means? Well, if it's not showing up, it probably means that it has died off. Okay, some of your species will not survive in this environment with everything turned on. You will notice that some are going to die off. After you record what has happened, if you don't see it, this means that it has died off. You're going to try to modify some of these. So if you click on one of the species, you will see that it tells you omnivore B eats plant A, plant B, plant C, herbivore A, herbivore B, herbivore C, and omnivore A. If you click on one of these, you can turn that off. So now omnivore B no longer eats plant C. and you can see that there is no more link to it. If you turn it back on, now it does, okay? You can change the top predator to no longer eat one of the following. Any of these you can click on and change so that they no longer eat that species, okay? And you're going to try to modify it so that all of these species thrive. So you should see all of these lines up here. None of them should be at 0. You're going to try and see if you can figure out a way to modify it so that all of them thrive in this environment and they can coexist. Then you're going to answer the questions. Was your prediction correct? How did you arrive at your prediction? What made you think that herbivore A was going to die off? What made you think that it would increase? And so on. What differences were there between your prediction and the simulation? Were you able to modify the parameters so that each species survived? Explain how you decided what changes to make. So try to play around with some changes. If you find that you're successful, tell us what you did that was successful. If you've tried many different things and for some reason you still can't get this ecosystem to survive, tell us what you did to modify it and whether it worked or not. If it didn't work, explain how you decided to make this change. For instance, I decided to change herbivore A and no longer make it eat plant A. The reason I decided to do that was because I saw the levels of plant A were down and I wanted to make sure that it had a chance to grow. Something along those lines. Explain why you made those changes. If it doesn't work out, tell us what you think might need to be done in order to make it work out. And then finally it says, which way does energy flow and how does eating an organism result in energy transfer? So which way is energy flowing and how does eating another organism result in that energy transfer? After you have done that, you're going to answer the final discussion question. How do humans affect the greater food web? In this model, how could humans who do not live in the ecosystem still manage to alter the flow of energy within the web? So even though we don't live in this ecosystem, how could we still impact this environment and still impact this food web and how that balance exists? Okay, so once again, you have step 1 of your chart, answer those few questions. Step 2 of your chart, answer those few questions. And if you need to look back at the instructions, you have a copy of the Google Slides, and you can look back at these 2 slides which have the directions for the simulator. Okay? All right, let us know if you have any questions.